you are from the United States, or Africa, or China, or the Philippines, there are, or is, in all cultures, a fascination between that which we think is good and that which we consider to be evil. The power of the epic poem, ladies and gentlemen, lies, in my experience, within the context of language. So let me share with you guys a couple of observations before I start to read. I am, and continue to be in my career, fascinated by the power of language. I think language is something unique to human beings. You know, of all the animals, only human beings have the capacity to communicate to the degree that we do. For now. I'm not sure if we're going to find out if other animals can communicate with me yet. But at least at this point, our ability to communicate with one another, to use language to express meaning and emotion, to convey sentiment and those kinds of things, is what separates us from all of the other creatures. Language, according to many poets, is an expression of the human soul. And it's something I want you guys to consider as I read Grendel, this focus on language. The other thing that I want you folks to consider, and I mentioned it already, is this whole notion of good versus evil. I want you to think about the ways that good versus evil plays itself out in this epic, or in this excerpt of the epic that I read to you. Okay? There is, within this idea of good versus evil, the reinforcement of what we call an archetype. I don't know if you folks have studied archetypes yet. It's a relatively simple concept. An archetype is simply a story about life that is familiar. It's a story that we share with one another to reinforce values. The value in a culture, a particular culture over another, the value in the family, the value in the school system, the value in government, etc., etc., etc. If you pay attention as you go through your lives and you listen to the language that people use with you, or the language that you read, what you will find is that archetypes are reinforced again and again and again. The archetype that we're going to see in this excerpt is that of good versus evil. Okay? Finally, I want you to have a sense of the religious nature of this passage. I'm going to read it to you as if I was a reverend delivering a fiery sermon. Okay? Because Beowulf was read out loud to the Anglo-Saxons. Okay? They would gather around campfires and share their stories with one another as a means of reinforcing the values in their culture. Okay? So when I read Beowulf, I like to read it with the passion of a reverend, or a priest, someone who has a great deal of fervor for the subject. Okay? So, again, I want you to think about the power of language. You should be able to hear me articulate that power of language. I want you to think about this concept of good versus evil as I'm reading through it. How good versus evil is an archetype. And I want you to listen to the religious undertones of Beowulf. Because even though it was an Anglo-Saxon poem, there are religious undertones and elements that we associate with it. Okay? Got it? Now, as I read along, please follow closely because we're going to ask you a few questions afterwards that will ask you to cite specific passages in this text. Ready? I hope I read it well. Came then striding in the night the walker of darkness in that gabled hall. The warriors slept, those who guarded the hall, all but one. It was well known among men that if God willed it not, No one would drag that demon to the shadows, but Beowulf watched in anger, waiting the battle's outcome. Came then from the moor under the misty hills, Grendel stalking under the weight of God's anger. That wicked ravager planned to ensnare many of the race of men in the high hall. He strode under the clouds, seeking eagerly till he came to the wine hall, the treasure hall, of men decorated in gold. Nor was it for the first time he had sought Hrothgar's home, but never in his life before or since did he find worse luck. Came then to the building that creature bereft of joys. When he touched it with his hands, the doors gave way at once, though its bands were forged in fire, intending evil, enraged. He swung the door wide, stood at the building's mouth. Quickly he moved across the well-made floor, in an angry mood, a horrible light, like fire, in his eyes. He saw the many warriors in the building, that band of kinsmen asleep together, and his spirit laughed. That monster expected to rip life from the body of each one before morning came. He expected a plentiful meal. It was his fate that he eat more of the race of men after that night. The mighty one Beowulf watched, waiting to see how the wicked one would go about starting. Nor did the wretch delay, but set about seizing a sleeping warrior unawares and bit into his bone locks, drinking the streams of blood, then swallowing huge morsels of flesh. Quickly he ate that man, even to his hands and his feet. Forward Grendel came, stepping nearer. Then he reached for Beowulf. Beowulf grasped his arm and sat up. The criminal knew he had not met in the Middle Earth another with such a grip. Grendel's spirit was afraid, and his heart eager to get away, to flee to his hiding place, flee to the devils he kept for company. Never had he met a man such as this. Beowulf then kept in mind the speeches he had made in the evening, and stood upright, firmly grasping Grendel's hand until the fingers broke. Snap! Right? The monster strove to escape. Beowulf stepped closer. Stepped closer. He's not afraid. Okay? That famous monster suddenly wanted to disappear into the fans. He realized the power of those hands, the wrathful grip he was in. Grendel felt sorry he had made that trip to Herod. The hall of warriors dinned, all the dames of the city, all the brave ones feared disaster. The building resounded. It is a wonder the wine hall withstood the battle, that the beautiful building did not fall to the ground. But it was made fast within and without, with iron bands forged with great skill. I have heard say many a meat bench adorned in gold went flying when those hostiles fought. No man had ever thought that splendid building could be damaged unless a fire should swallow it. The din rose louder. The Danes stood in dreadful terror. Everyone heard lamentation, a terrifying song through the wall. Grendel, hell's fiend, God's enemy, sat in defeat, bewailing his wound. That man, mightiest of warriors alive, held fast. He would not for any reason allow his murderous visitor to escape alive, to keep the days of his life. Beowulf's warriors brandished many a sword, inheritances from the ancient days, trying to protect their chief, but that did no good. They could not have known those brave warriors as they fought, striding from all sides, seeking to take Grendel's soul, that no battle sword could harm him. He had enchantment against the edges of weapons. Then the end of Grendel's life was miserable. As he would travel far into the lands of fiends, Grendel, the foe of God, who had long troubled the spirits of men with his crimes, found that his body could not stand against the hand grip of that warrior. Each has hate